Welcome everyone to the Expat Woman Show. I'm very excited today to have Megan Norton, who is a TCK consultant and a intercultural coach. And maybe I got it wrong. I just got kicked off the whole internet, so my mind's a little frazzled right now. So I'm going to actually have Megan introduce herself and tell us what she does, and then jump into this very exciting topic about global mobility and identity. So, welcome, Megan. Thank you for making the time to join us.
Thank you, Nyna. Can you hear me okay?
I can. I can.
Okay, good, good, good. Well, thank you for having me on the Expat Woman Show. It's a delight, and I appreciate your patience with technology, everybody. It's a delight to be with you this hour. So I'm Megan, and sometimes I wonder how to answer the question what I do because it looks differently in different sectors, but fundamentally, professionally, what I find most meaningful and that grounds me is to be a facilitator, an instructor, a mentor for all things intercultural. And so that can look like doing trainings for corporate relocation, but it can also look like working one-on-one with a third culture kid and talking about identity and belonging.
You shared it beautifully, Megan, even though you do more than one thing. I think you explained it really well. So, thanks for that. I know it's hard when you wear more than one hat or your target audiences are more than one. So, I mean, that is a great way of sharing what I often say an elevator pitch, because you've got to be able to put it across in 30 seconds. And you definitely did that. And where are you currently based? Would you mind sharing a little bit about where you are living right now, what your expat journey has been like? I mean, in your case, it's also been a third culture kid journey, which I guess when you move from being a third culture kid to an expat, is there like an age, in the whole third culture kid scenario or playbook? So yeah, if you can just share, your whole journey, which countries you've lived in, etc., just for our listeners and viewers to get a sense of, how multicultural you are.
Yes, I'm just chuckling at the labels because sometimes we can get caught up in, what how to describe our experience. And so, third culture kid, by definition, traditionally, it's somebody who has spent a significant amount of their developmental years outside of their passport country or a parent's culture. And so that part of the definition that means developmental years, that's like 0 to 18. And then I guess when you are an adult, you become an adult third culture kid or expat, I suppose. But currently, and I just recently moved to a new US state, that being Nebraska, right in the middle of the United States, basically. But I have lived in 5 other US states and also collectively 10 countries. So 8 of those were as a TCK, and then 2 have been as an adult TCK or expat, meaning I did go live and work abroad as a single expat.
Wonderful. Yeah, and I know the labels, right? It's like people sometimes say, why do you call it the expat woman? Why is it not the immigrant woman? I really think it doesn't matter like what you call yourself. It just, and that's why I like our topic today, because it's about, global identity. Because I think it's in the end, it's what you consider yourself, and if you're comfortable with who you are and where you live, etc. So, with your journey, like, how old were you when you first lived abroad, and what took you to all these different countries before you moved on your own? Like, just curious about that. And what was it like? Because I have cousins whose their dad was an ambassador. He was a diplomat Indian ambassador to various countries, and they every 4 years they moved, and they told me one of the hardest things was, school, making friends with new kids, or sometimes getting bullied, or also just a new place to live in, a new house, a new bedroom. So sometimes it seems so glamorous. Like for me, it seemed like such an exciting life. Like I was like, wow, they have such a glamorous life, they get to live in all these countries. But I know that's not always the case. So, just for people who are watching this, who are third culture kids, or who have children who are third culture kids, or even those planning to become globally mobile, I think it'd be useful to know, how it affects kids and how it affected you, and the pros and cons of both a third culture kid and a third culture adult.
Mhm. Yes, yeah, you're speaking into what's reflective of my experience. My dad was a U.S. diplomat, and so we moved every 3 years, or in that time frame, to a different country. And so while I hold a U.S. passport, the notions of where am I from really truly are all these different countries that I lived in. So the lifestyle, the experience is quite paradoxical, that you have these wonderful celebrations of expanded worldview, relational wealth. You're exposed to so many cultures, meaning how other people do life, how values look differently in different cultural contexts. And right on the other side of that coin, you have this complexity of how do I belong to this culture, or if I live in this country, um, how do I answer that question so simply of where are you from? And I mentioned relational wealth. There's also the flip side of relational loss when people move, when you move. So it's a experience that's really both and, that you feel a sense of belonging to an attachment to many people and places, and yet you can also feel fragmented and frayed.
Right, right. No, I love that you brought up the relationship loss, because I think I think people forget about that. And I know that sometimes kids or even adults who travel or move a lot don't make close friendships because they don't want to have to then face that loss when they move to another country. It's like mine is very different, but my mom lives in India, and I visit her once a year, and every time I leave, it is so hard to leave her. It's like heartbreaking, especially as she's getting older. But for that one year that I'm not there, it's fine. And then I go through that every year. So I can imagine with, TCKs every 3 years having to do that is it may not be the same relationships you have with a parent, but it's still friendships. You can make close friendships, not knowing if you'll ever see them again. Uh, so thanks for sharing that. I know there's a lot of pros, as you said as well, the expanded worldview. And I think you are a product of all that, all the experiences you've had. And I know you are doing so much right now to inspire and educate and impact and empower other people going through that journey or planning to go through that journey. But let's talk about finding home, because I think that's such an important part. I mean, in my case, I've only lived in India, and now I live in the US. I travel quite a bit, but for me, I'm still trying to find home. And it's just two countries, and I feel like I'm straddling two worlds. What about you? Like, have you found home? Or even for anyone listening who's trying to figure out where is home, whether they've an expat in just another country, or they've been, in a couple of countries, serial expat. Have you found home? If you haven't, what are you looking for? And how can people find home or belonging, especially, in this global mobile world?
Yes, yeah, it's a huge question, huge uncertainty of if we ever arrive at home. The world is increasingly speeding up, and um, the only constant is change. It feels like, and so home for me, it's a move concept. It's an ever expanding concept. It depends, who I'm talking to and how I answer it, because it can be a place, it can be a physical place, but more so than that, it's an emotional feeling, and it's where I heard somebody once describe it as it's where my physical and my emotional needs are met. And that gives a lot of freedom of, all right, it doesn't need to be necessarily in a walled space. It can be out in nature that I feel at home, I feel at peace. And in terms of countries, yes, it can have with TCKs, with expats, highly mobile people, that attachment to place can make you feel a sense of grief, that when you return to that location, things are different, and it feels like, okay, how was this ever home? And do I claim it as home? Does the place or the people claim me as home? And so one way to reconcile that for myself is I call these countries I've lived in my heart homes, where I'll carry the memories within me. And I think it's really foundational to look inside about what do you need for that comfort, for that peace, for that safety, and affirmation of, okay, where is home? And that's going to be value driven. That's going to be driven by your family structure, by your belief system. So looking and reflecting on all of those elements, I think, gives us a lot more of breadth of understanding what is home, and not get too frazzled that, oh, I'll never be home, because really home is within us, and how we share it with others.
Wow, that's fantastic. That's such a valuable tip for any of us. And I think it requires a lot of work, and really, as you say, finding that home within yourself. But that was really very powerful what you just shared. I do see a couple of people have joined us live. So if you're in watching on LinkedIn or YouTube, just introduce yourself in the comments. If you have anything to add to Megan's conversation, or you have a question, let us know. And this will also be available on YouTube and LinkedIn and the Expat Woman page, all our pages. So people can also leave questions later, because this is such a heavy topic, and I think something that so many people are trying to get a better understanding of. So I'd love to hear from people in the comments. So how do you establish a sense of belonging in a new country or community? Because yeah, and I see Daniela just said, great to see you both. Daniela was on the Expat Woman Show a couple of months ago, and I know you both know each other. Yeah, Megan, yeah. So how do you establish a sense of belonging in a new country community, especially if it's only like, every 3 years, like you're moving somewhere new? Any tips that you can share would be very helpful.
Yeah, and I'm learning, and I'm relearning, and I'm unlearning how to do this, because I think it depends on your stage in life, your phase in life, the dynamics of your nuclear family, and what are the needs of the family, and how to get involved. But essentially doing that reflective work of, what are my values, and am I living in alignment to those values in this new location? One of the things, I just moved a month ago, and so I'm in the throes of transition, and what I'm finding helpful is giving myself that grace and space, knowing that it's going to take time to feel belonging, to establish a sense of who I am, because I'm also going to take on new roles in this community, and new relationships, and so really giving myself patience that this is going to take time. There's a a beautiful model called the transition bridge. And essentially it maps out how our sense of belonging on one side of the bridge is loosened, and we're crossing the bridge where, you know, it can be unsteady, maybe it can be chaotic, it can be messy, and we're entering this new location where there's maybe open arms, you know, people in the community who want to receive us, but also knowing that the complexity of telling our story is going to take time. Listening to other people's stories is going to take time. So, you know, being curious is a universal value I think we need to all try to embody, so that we're understanding, yeah, people are constantly crossing bridges. It doesn't necessarily need to be this epic country move. It can be from life transitions, life stage transitions. So everybody can relate to, oh, I feel comfortable in my sense of belonging. So get curious about yourself, about your values, and then others, and how are they receiving you.
Beautiful. Thanks for sharing that. I see that Rosine has joined us. She's born and raised in Istanbul, half French and half Turk, and she's currently living in the Bay Area. And she agrees that grief is real, but turning this into richness and considering becoming a world citizen beyond boundaries makes a big difference to our well-being. That's so powerful. I'm going to share it here so people can read it. Thanks for sharing, Rosine. So, Megan, in terms of finding community, because that's a hard one. So and I love what you shared about the bridge, and and all, keeping your values and understanding about yourself, and the country you're moving to. Now, if you move to very diverse countries, and maybe you can share some of the countries you lived in where the culture is different, maybe you don't speak the language. And I know when Daniela was on my show a couple of months ago, we spoke about uh, cultural intelligence. So but as a child, or even as a young adult, how does one prepare for another country? Do your parents kind of prep you for it? Do you just do the homework yourself, or do you just land there and then kind of figure it out? How did you do it, and do you have any tips and advice for others facing that, or will be facing it in the future?
Mm. Yeah, it's a great question, and I find that different sectors, different systems have different trainings that they do for family units, pre-departure, sometimes in the transition, sometimes re-entry to a passport country. I think this is all, though, new language, new ways of stating. Like, it's important to acknowledge that there are these transition stages, and that there's these socio-emotional needs. Sometimes I feel that companies, systems, government, education systems have done a really good job at the logistics piece, right? They come along beside with these packages for logistics, but it's these emotional and familial processing and debriefings that I think is becoming more commonplace, in the sense that there's heightened awareness that if we do these processing, then it's more healthy, for the family to adjust. And so while I didn't specifically have these, trainings or this kind of language, my upbringing as a third culture kid, I do see that the system in which I grew up in, the Foreign Service, did have these phases of acknowledging that this is a transition period, and this is how we're going to come along beside you to support your family. So I think that systems are doing a better job at acknowledging that there needs to be time given and space given to process the grief, process the celebrations. And I'm hopeful that more people are going to recognize that in telling the stories and telling and sharing what was hard and what was beneficial will be equipping expats for smoother transitions. Um, One thing that was helpful in my upbringing was that we knew every 2 to 3 years we would be moving. So there was this pattern. And what I find hard for TCKs who tell me, we didn't have any notice that we were moving. We didn't have any notice to say goodbye to our friends or goodbye to places that we love to hang out in. That's hard. And that needs to be acknowledged and debriefed with somebody who can walk through listening to story and equipping them with strategies. Okay, how do you go back and resolve that unresolved grief? How do you move forward when you didn't have a time to say goodbye and now you have to say hello to a new community? So all in all, what I'm guess I want to say is that we have better language and awareness that it's significant to process the emotional part of living in different countries.
I think there's a lot more right now, right, with training and stuff. Daniela just said, beautifully said, Megan. Transitions are particularly hard when repatriating and often overlooked. Yeah, I know that repatriate, we talk a lot about, being moving to a new country and the expat culture shock, but I know it's very hard for people who move back, as you say, to their passport country, as Daniela said. I just met a friend the other day who's moved back to the US from being an expat in two other countries, and she was like, I just wasn't prepared for this, how hard, I thought it was hard living in these other countries, but coming back has been even harder. And even when I travel to India every year, even in a year, India changes, and it's just hard. Like, it's like, wow, places that I loved, of food restaurants that I would eat at, have all gone. Things have changed, and there is always a little bit of grief. And this is just, I'm not even moving back permanently. So thank you, Daniela, for bringing that up, and Megan for touching on the subject. So I was just curious, because you said that you were not, you didn't know you were moving, but wouldn't like, was it just like, okay, today we're leaving this country and moving to you must have had some sense, right, of the moves?
Yes, and what I think was very beneficial for our pattern was that we did know every 2 to 3 years we would be moving. But in talking with TCKs who didn't have that forewarning, I think there needs to be that additional support and coming along beside and processing that.
Right, right. And yeah, no, I think sometimes parents, maybe it either doesn't strike them, or they're not aware of how important it is, or they just decide it's better not to tell the kid because it might be too hard for them, right? So just that, yeah, that
Yeah.
could be it. That could be it too. And I'm also thinking, like, there are some, if you work for a company that is focused on global mobility and relocation, and I'm seeing more and more people on LinkedIn, more and more companies bringing in people who are experts in global mobility and relocation. But what about if someone doesn't work for a company, they have their own business, or move for other reasons, they apply for the lottery and they get in, and then they have to start from scratch. What would, in their case, either for those people or their kids, where they don't have any support from a company that has all these trainings, and people who are focused on this whole job of relocation, what tips would you share, or what suggestions would you have for them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think increasingly with the growing awareness that global mobility is not going away, right? Well, during COVID time, it looked a little different, but as the norms of global mobility is continuing and in different forms, right? as you mentioned, if it's an independent kind of led relocation, or I'm thinking about how international exchange students, that's a form of global mobility. That's becoming sometimes younger and younger in the high school and even the middle school age, when kids are being sent to live with a family member in another country to study there. All those points are cross-cultural interactions. And so I would recommend that people do some reading on what does it mean to work and live cross-culturally. To again, I think it starts with the individual of reflecting what are my values, what is my culture, what are my goals in moving and living abroad, and it can be helpful perhaps to have a coach for that, right? A mentor. But even reaching out to somebody who has done it before and say what strategies worked for you. Because it depends. If you're moving with a family unit, maybe you're moving only one partner is moving and the family staying. So all of those configurations are going to have different strategies. But increasingly, I'm very pleased to see the number of written resources out there. Even your show, the Expat Woman Show, it's a resource to hear and glean wisdom and advice. But doing that initial groundwork of gathering information and gathering stories and what people have done, I think it's really important.
Thank you for sharing that. And yeah, I think, as you said, with the expat show, with work that you do, Daniela, where you're putting yourself out there and sharing through your book tours, your books, your courses, your workshops. I think people are gaining awareness, because I know in the past this didn't exist, and I see how it affected some of the people that had traveled around when they were kids. Really affected them mentally. So I'm glad that the world is realizing, and that this is so important. So I'm two very quick questions, because we are almost at the end of the show. You talk a lot about the values, and I find that really interesting. So like, just for people listening in, like when you talk about the values, like, are you talking about like your personal values? Can you give some examples? Because I think that's such an important part. Like with a business, when we talk about starting business, we talk about our core values. Do they align with the business? So it's interesting to hear it from a perspective of moving to a new country. So would you mind sharing a little bit about that?
Yes, I'll give one concrete example that I'm leaning into right now, and it goes back to your question about home. And one of my values is having a sense of beauty around me. So how do I create a physical space of beauty that I want to be in, that I can relax in, that I can even do my work in? And so creating a sense of home means having flowers. Here, I'll show you. I have flowers on my desk. That goes back to my value of beauty. And then also having a sense of home is having those objects that maybe you got in a certain country, that it wasn't expensive, maybe, but it holds so much meaning and impacts you when you see it, thinking that's a connection to my home. And that's a sense of beauty around me as well, those objects that I decorate my home with. Another value is connection, right? That's one of my personal values. And so it's how do I connect to a local community? And that's asking my friends, do you know anybody here in this new state, in this new city I live in? So it takes work, it takes energy to expand capacity, to look at what are my values, how am I living in them, but knowing that transition and change might also change values, and that mine might not be in alignment with the city I live in, and how do I then lean into that. But that's not to be resolved in a day, right? And so that goes back to the grace and patience part of as an expat, or just as a domestic expat in my own country. Just remaining curious.
I love it. I love it. And thanks for sharing those flowers. Those are beautiful. And I think it's so important to, as you say, carry, uh, what matters to you to the different countries you move to. So my last question is, before I ask you to share how people can connect with you, is what you lived in so many countries. Is there one country that you would love to move back to? And then I know you came out with a book as well, if I'm not mistaken. I think I have, there's so much going on my social media network. It's hard to keep track. Oh yeah, so talk about the book and your favorite country. Thank you. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Oh gosh, that's the hardest question. Oh, I can't. I don't know how to answer the country question. Every country holds significance in some way. So just and in my memories, they're different because of the different ages I was in the countries. But certainly, I would love to revisit and go back and taste the tastes and smell the smells. So that question, because immediately I feel my heart center just warm, because you're helping me remember places that have shaped me.
Oh.
So thank you. Yeah, and as Daniela mentioned, repatriation is a really hard stage. It can be difficult and often overlooked. That resonated with me. I wrote this book, Belonging Beyond Borders: How Adult Third Culture Kids Can Cultivate a Sense of Belonging. The target audience being adult third culture kids, but the principles of transition don't only, aren't only for adult TCKs. And I talk about, repatriation, but also in emerging adulthood, how do you define who you are and how do you cultivate belonging when you're not being, like carted around with your family, but then in adulthood, like how do you independently then decide, where am I going to put roots or not put roots? How am I going to feel settled in location that I choose?
Congratulations. That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that book. And I'm sure it wasn't easy. And I know writing a book is not for the faint-hearted, and you made it happen. So that, yeah. And if you can share the link, in the comments of our 3 live streams, that'd be very helpful. And how people can get the book, because I'm sure that would be an extension of what you just shared today. So it would be really helpful. Is for everyone. And you said it's not just for third culture kid adults, but anyone who's globally mobile. And how can people connect with you? What's the best way for them to reach out to you? Do you have anything else going on that you'd like to share before we end the show?
Yes, please connect via LinkedIn, Megan Norton. I also have my website, which is adultthirdculturekid.com, and also on Instagram, Adult Third Culture Kid. I have a couple of virtual book clubs coming up in September, and so check out those timings and those dates. I'd love to have more people join the virtual book clubs.
Oh, that's beautiful. Congrats on that as well. Yeah, so I'd love for you to share all those links so people can find them. I'm sure the book club too will be really interesting, especially since it's virtual, because it's so hard to, find other people who are talking about the things you talk about. If you live in a small town and you're trying to find other expats or repats. So yeah, so it's good. Thank you so much, Megan, for joining us. Thank you for everyone who's watching this live or listening to it or watching it later. My name is Nyna Caputi. I'm the founder and CEO of the Expat Woman. I host the show every week with amazing expats, repats, expat service providers like Megan. And Megan was actually also on a speaker at the Expat Woman Summit in March, and I'm actually hosting another audio summit in October. So I'll be sharing a link to that as well. And thank you, Daniela, and everyone else who joined us. Have a wonderful rest of the day. Bye.
Thank you, Nyna.
Thanks.